Marcus Chen adjusted his translator earpiece as he entered the massive auction hall on Kepler Station. The smell of ozone and alien pheromones filled the air, a mixture that would have made most humans sick. But Marcus had spent 15 years trading in the Outer Rim, dealing with species that considered humans barely civilized barbarians. He'd learned to adapt. The auction hall stretched before him like a cathedral of chrome and glass. Hundreds of beings from across the galaxy filled the tiered seating, their various forms creating a grotesque rainbow of scales, fur, and synthetic skin. At the center, a raised platform displayed the evening's merchandise. Marcus pulled up his credit balance on his wrist display and winced. 43 million standard credits. It was everything he had. Liquidated from his shipping company, his properties on Mars, even his grandmother's antique jewelry collection. His business partner Sarah had called him insane before cutting all ties. Maybe she was right. The auctioneer, a tall Vorthan with 4 arms and silver skin, stepped up to the podium. Its voice boomed through the translation matrix, reaching every species in their native tongue. Welcome, distinguished buyers, to tonight's special collection. We present the defective genetic lot, a unique opportunity to acquire specimens with documented flaws and aberrations, perfect for research, experimentation, or disposal. The first cage rose from the platform's floor. Inside cowered a being that looked almost human, except for the metallic blue skin and large, dark eyes. The creature's hands shook as it pressed against the bars. Lot 1, the auctioneer continued, a Zephyrian with acute empathic sensitivity, completely useless for standard labor due to emotional instability when exposed to negative thoughts. Bidding starts at 500 credits. Marcus watched in growing horror as the bidding proceeded. The blue-skinned being went to a Krellian research facility for 800 credits. The buyer's representative made no effort to hide their intentions, speaking openly about pain threshold experiments and neural mapping through trauma response. The next cage contained what appeared to be a giant insect, its chitinous shell a deep purple. The creature's antennae twitched constantly, and it kept making soft clicking sounds. A hive-born Thessian, completely severed from the collective consciousness, unable to function in standard Thessian society. The neural damage makes it ideal for individual behavioral studies. The clicking grew more frantic as the bidding began. Marcus realized the sounds were a pattern, almost like Morse code. The creature was trying to communicate, to plead. It sold for 1,200 credits to a private collector known for exotic pets. One by one, the cages appeared. Each contained a being that had been deemed defective by their own species standards. A crystalloid whose light-generating organs flickered unpredictably. A shapeshifter stuck permanently in an awkward hybrid form between 2 species. A telepathic Mindari whose abilities were so weak they'd been exiled from their homeworld. With each sale, Marcus felt his resolve strengthen. These weren't defective specimens. They were people. Individuals who didn't fit the narrow parameters their societies demanded. He thought of his own sister, born with a rare genetic condition that made her allergic to most synthetic materials. On Earth, she was a successful artist who worked exclusively with natural fibers. Here, she would have been labeled defective. The prices remained low throughout the evening. Most buyers were researchers or collectors looking for curiosities. The highest bid so far had been 3,200 credits for a winged humanoid whose flight membranes had been damaged in what looked like a deliberate attack. Lot 47, the auctioneer announced as a new cage emerged. A canine hybrid from the Lupus colonies. Genetic experiments have created an unstable personality matrix. Exhibits pack loyalty to an extreme degree, making it unsuitable for individual assignment or standard servitude. The being in the cage looked remarkably like a werewolf from human mythology, but smaller and more delicate. Its ears were flattened against its skull, and it kept glancing around the room with obvious terror. When its eyes met Marcus's, he saw intelligence there, and desperation. This lot also shows signs of artistic inclination, the auctioneer continued with clear disdain, further reducing its practical value. Bidding starts at 300 credits. Marcus had heard enough. He stood up, his movement causing several nearby beings to turn and stare. Humans were uncommon at these auctions, usually present only as items for sale. 1 million credits, he said clearly, his voice carrying through the hall's acoustics. The auctioneer paused, its 4 hands frozen in mid-gesture. The entire hall fell silent except for the soft hum of life support systems. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that bid?" 1 million standard credits for Lot 47. A ripple of chittering, growling, and electronic sounds filled the air as the crowd reacted. The canine hybrid in the cage had pressed itself against the bars closest to Marcus, its eyes wide with something that might have been hope. Sold to the human bidder, the auctioneer said after a moment. Lot 48. But Marcus wasn't finished. As the next cage rose, containing what looked like a small dragon with withered wings, he stood again. How many lots remain in tonight's auction? The auctioneer consulted its display. 63 additional specimens. Honored buyer. Marcus took a deep breath, thinking of his empty bank account and his sister's words about following your conscience even when it was expensive. I bid 1 million credits on each remaining lot. The hall erupted. Beings stood, shouted, and gestured wildly. Some seemed outraged at being outbid so dramatically. Others appeared confused by the human strategy. The auctioneer pounded its gavel repeatedly, calling for order. That is, an unprecedented bid. It finally managed. Your total obligation would be 63 million credits. Do you have verification of funds? Marcus transmitted his financial data to the auction house's computers. There was a long pause as systems verified his assets and credit lines. He'd mortgaged everything, called in every favor, and maxed out every line of credit he could access. The calculation was tight, but it would work. Funds verified, announced the hall's AI system. All remaining lots are sold to human buyer designation Chen Marcus. The crowd began to disperse, many grumbling about the waste of perfectly good research materials. But Marcus barely noticed. He was looking at the cages, at the dozens of beings who had just become his responsibility. Each face showed a different emotion: confusion, fear, hope, suspicion. Some wept, some stood frozen in shock, and a few had collapsed entirely. As the auction hall emptied, Marcus made his way down to the platform level. The station security would handle the transfer procedures, but he wanted to speak with them first. The canine hybrid was still pressed against the bars of its cage, watching him approach. "Hello," Marcus said softly, crouching down to be at eye level. "My name is Marcus. What's yours?" The being's ears twitched forward. When it spoke, its voice was barely a whisper, filtered through the translator matrix. They called me Specimen 47. Before that, I was Kaida. Well, Kaida, you're not a specimen anymore. None of you are. Around the platform, other beings had begun to listen to the conversation. The small dragon with damaged wings had crawled to the front of its cage. The blue-skinned Zephyrian was staring with those large dark eyes. "What happens to us now?" asked another voice. This came from a tall, thin being covered in what looked like shifting shadow. "What experiments will you perform?" Marcus stood and addressed the group as a whole, his voice carrying clearly through the translator matrix. "No experiments, no research, no servitude." He paused, looking at each cage in turn. "You're free, all of you. I'm going to arrange transport to wherever you want to go, and enough credits to start over." The silence that followed was different from the shocked quiet of the auction hall. This was the silence of beings afraid to hope, afraid to believe what they'd heard. "Why?" The question came from the Mindari, the weak telepath. "We are defective, broken. Why would you spend so much for nothing?" Marcus smiled, remembering his sister's artwork hanging in galleries across human space, celebrated for its unique perspective and innovative techniques. "You're not broken," he said simply. "You're just different, and different can be extraordinary." The processing took 3 hours. Station bureaucracy was the same everywhere in the galaxy, requiring forms, verifications, and fees for everything. But finally, Marcus found himself in Cargo Bay 7, where temporary accommodations had been set up for his purchases. The beings sat in small groups, still processing their change in circumstances. Some had begun to talk quietly among themselves, the first conversations many had enjoyed in cycles. Others remained isolated, either from habit or species incompatibility. Marcus walked among them, introducing himself properly and asking about their backgrounds. The stories were heartbreaking and inspiring in equal measure. Kaida had been a sculptor before her genetic modification went wrong, creating an unstable personality that made her unsuitable for pack life. The small dragon, who gave his name as Ember, had been a poet before his wings were damaged in a flying accident. His inability to fly had made him worthless in a society that valued aerial mobility above all else. As the hours passed, Marcus began to see patterns. Many of these beings weren't just cast-offs. They were artists, thinkers, and innovators whose differences made them valuable in ways their societies couldn't recognize. The shapeshifter stuck in hybrid form had unique insights into both parent species. The crystalloid with flickering lights created patterns that were beautiful rather than functional. By the time the first transport ships arrived, Marcus had the beginnings of a plan. Not just to help these beings find new homes, but to create something unprecedented. A place where being different wasn't a flaw to be corrected or a defect to be studied, but a strength to be celebrated. As he watched the first group board a transport bound for the neutral worlds, Kaida approached him. Her ears were no longer flattened in fear, and she stood straighter than before. "You could have bought soldiers," she said. "Warriors or workers. Beings who could have made you wealthy." Marcus nodded. "I could have. Instead, you chose us. The broken ones. I chose you because you're not broken. You're just not understood." Kaida's tail wagged once, a quick, unconscious movement. It was the first time Marcus had seen any of them display a positive emotion. "Where will you go?" he asked her. She looked back at the remaining beings in the cargo bay, then at the ships preparing for departure. "I think," she said slowly, "I would like to help you with whatever you're planning, if you'll have me." Marcus grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that." As more transports arrived and the cargo bay slowly emptied, Marcus began making calls. He had contacts throughout human space and beyond, people who owed him favors or shared his vision of what the galaxy could become. By the time the last being had been offered transport, he had commitments for funding, equipment, and most importantly, a location. The old mining station in the Proxima system had been abandoned for 20 years. It was isolated, self-sufficient, and far enough from major trade routes to avoid unwanted attention. With some work, it could become something new, something unprecedented, a place where defects became differences, where flaws became features, and where the galaxy's outcasts could become its innovators. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the observation deck of Haven Station, watching as another transport ship approached the docking bay. The old mining facility had been transformed beyond recognition. Where once there had been empty ore processors and rusted corridors, now there were gardens, workshops, and laboratories designed not for extraction but for creation. Kaida joined him at the viewport, her fur now glossy and healthy, rather than the dull, stressed coat she'd worn at the auction. In her hands, she carried a data pad showing the station's latest projects. The new arrivals include a mollusk engineer whose slime secretions were deemed too corrosive for standard environments, she reported. Also a ethereal whose phase-shifting abilities are incomplete, and 3 more crystalloids with non-standard light patterns. Marcus nodded, watching the transport maneuver toward the docking clamps. Word had spread through the underground networks. Haven Station had become a beacon for the unwanted, the defective, the different. They came in small groups, sometimes individually, often with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the hope that somewhere in the galaxy, someone valued what they had to offer. "How's the mollusk going to handle our atmospheric mix?" he asked. Ember's been working on environmental suits. His poetry gives him a unique perspective on flow dynamics. The suit designs are elegant and functional. Kaida's tail wagged slightly as she spoke. She'd developed the habit of unconscious emotional displays since arriving at Haven, a sign of the psychological healing that happened when beings were allowed to be themselves. The station had grown to nearly 200 residents, each bringing their own skills and perspectives. What had started as a rescue operation had evolved into something far more significant. Haven wasn't just providing shelter, it was proving that diversity of thought and ability could accomplish things that conformist societies never could. The Thessian hiveborn, whose name was Chorus, had revolutionized their agricultural systems. Without the overwhelming noise of the collective consciousness, Chorus could think independently, developing growing techniques that increased yield by 40% while using half the resources. The innovation was already being quietly adopted by human colonies, though the Thessian Empire refused to acknowledge its source. The transport docked with a soft vibration through the station's hull. Marcus and Kaida made their way to the arrival bay, where Dr. Sarah Okafor was already waiting with her medical team. Sarah had been one of the first to join Haven, a xenobiologist whose research into adaptive medicine had been deemed too radical by the conservative medical council on Earth. Here, her work in cross-species treatment had saved dozens of lives. The airlock opened, revealing the 3 new arrivals. The mollusk engineer was immediately recognizable by the specialized environmental suit covering its boneless body. The secretion problem was evident in the suit's design, with multiple chemical filters and a complex waste processing system. Despite the bulk, the being moved with surprising grace. The ethereal flickered in and out of visibility as it stepped through the airlock, its partial phase shifting creating a disorienting strobe effect. The being appeared humanoid when solid, but translucent and constantly wavering at the edges. The three crystalloids were the most striking. Where normal members of their species generated steady, bright light in primary colors, these three pulsed and shifted through spectrums that included colors Marcus didn't have names for. Their crystalline bodies seemed to sing with inner light that danced rather than simply shone. "Welcome to Haven," Marcus said as the group approached. "I'm Marcus Chen, and this is Kaida, our cultural liaison." The mollusk spoke first, its voice filtered through its suit's communication system. "I am Engineer Flux. I was told this place accepts those whose biology makes them unsuitable for standard society." "More than accepts," Kaida replied. "Celebrates. Your unique secretions might be exactly what we need for our expansion project." Dr. Okafor stepped forward to address the ethereal. "The phase-shifting instability must be exhausting. We have treatments that can help stabilize the effect, if you're interested, or we can help you learn to control it more precisely." The ethereal's form solidified slightly. "Control? I was told it was impossible, that I would flicker forever, unable to exist fully in any phase. We've learned that impossible is often just a matter of perspective," Sarah said with a warm smile. "One of our residents, a shapeshifter, has been working on phase state research. Turns out that being stuck between forms gives unique insights into both." As they talked, Marcus noticed a commotion near the main workshop. Through the transparent aluminum walls, he could see Ember, the small dragon with damaged wings, gesturing excitedly at something on his workbench. Around him, several other residents had gathered, their attention focused on whatever he was showing them. "Excuse me for a moment," Marcus told the new arrivals. "Kaida, could you get them settled? I think Ember's made another breakthrough." The workshop smelled of ozone and heated metals, familiar scents that reminded Marcus of his days building ship drives. Ember looked up as he entered, the dragon's eyes bright with excitement. "Marcus, you need to see this." Ember held up what looked like a piece of crystalline sculpture, about the size of a human fist. "The new light patterns from the crystalloid refugees gave me an idea." Around the workbench, other residents had gathered. Nina, the shapeshifter stuck in permanent hybrid form, leaned over Ember's shoulder. Her mixture of aquatic and terrestrial features let her breathe both air and water, making her invaluable for the station's life support systems. Beside her stood Whisper, the weak telepath whose abilities were so limited that the Mindari had exiled her. What they hadn't realized was that her gentle touch could soothe trauma in ways that powerful telepathy never could. "What am I looking at?" Marcus asked, examining the crystal structure. "A new type of faster-than-light communication," Ember said, his voice filled with pride. "The irregular light patterns that make the crystalloids defective in their society actually create quantum entanglement resonances. Combined with my poetry about flow states and Nina's understanding of hybrid existence, we've created a communication method that doesn't rely on existing relay networks." Marcus nearly dropped the crystal. "You've built an FTL communicator?" "Better than that," Nina added, her gill slits fluttering with excitement. "It's untappable. The quantum states are too chaotic for any existing monitoring equipment to decode, but they follow poetic patterns that conscious beings can interpret." The implications hit Marcus like an asteroid strike. Independent FTL communication had been the holy grail of isolated colonies for centuries. The major powers maintained control partly through their monopoly on the relay networks. A technology like this could revolutionize everything. "Have you tested it?" Whisper nodded, her telepathic abilities allowing her to coordinate the complex mental states required for the system. "We established contact with a colony ship in the Vega system. They confirmed receipt of our poetry-based message patterns." Before Marcus could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the station. The arrival alert was different from the emergency klaxon, but in the early days of Haven, any unexpected visitor could mean trouble. Marcus's wrist display showed 3 ships approaching, traveling in military formation. "Galactic Council vessels." Kaida's voice came through the comm system. "They're requesting permission to board." Marcus felt his stomach clench. The Galactic Council had been suspicious of Haven from the beginning, but they'd had no legal grounds to interfere. The station was in neutral space, and all residents were there voluntarily. But if the council had discovered their technological breakthroughs, Ember, hide everything, Marcus ordered. Nina, can you get the communicator to the secure lab? Already done, she replied, her hybrid physiology allowing her to move through water-filled maintenance tubes that other beings couldn't access. It's in the aquatic section with the rest of our sensitive research. Marcus hurried to the docking bay, arriving just as the council's representative stepped through the airlock. Commander Vex was a Krellian, her reptilian features set in an expression of official displeasure. Behind her came a full inspection team representing multiple species. Mr. Chen, she said without preamble. The Council has received reports that Haven Station is engaged in activities that violate the Controlled Technology Acts. Which activities specifically? Marcus asked, keeping his voice level. Unauthorized research into faster-than-light communication technologies, development of biological weapons through genetic manipulation, and conspiracy to undermine established galactic communication networks. Each accusation was both false and partially true in ways that made Marcus's position precarious. The FTL communication breakthrough was real, but they weren't trying to undermine anything. The biological research was therapeutic, not weapons development, and there was no conspiracy beyond helping people be themselves. You're welcome to inspect the station, Marcus said after a moment. All our research is documented and available for review. Commander Vex gestured to her team, and they spread out through the station with practiced efficiency. Marcus followed the main group as they toured the facilities, watching their reactions to what they found. In the medical bay, they discovered Dr. Okafor's adaptive medicine research. Instead of weapons, they found treatments that allowed beings from different species to coexist safely. The mollusk engineer's secretions, which the Council expected to find weaponized, had been used to create new hull sealants that could repair microfractures in real time. The agricultural section showcased Chorus's independent growing techniques, rather than the dangerous genetic manipulation they'd been told about. They found food production methods that could sustain colonies on previously uninhabitable worlds. Workshop after workshop revealed the same pattern. Technologies that the Council's member species had dismissed as impossible or impractical, developed by beings those same species had labeled as defective. Each innovation solved real problems in elegant ways that established thinking couldn't achieve. As the tour continued, Marcus noticed the inspection team's attitudes beginning to shift. The weapons expert stopped taking notes about potential dangers and started asking questions about applications. The technology assessor began requesting copies of research data for security evaluation that sounded more like scientific interest. The breaking point came in the cultural center, where several residents were engaged in a collaborative art project. The crystalloids were providing light patterns while Ember composed verse to match the visual rhythms. A group of musical species harmonized with melodies that complemented both light and words. The result was something unprecedented. An art form that engaged multiple senses and species simultaneously. Commander Vex stood transfixed, her reptilian features softening as the performance continued. The harsh lines of official duty melted away, replaced by something Marcus recognized as wonder. When the piece concluded, one of the performers approached the commander. It was Echo, a being whose vocal cords had been damaged in an industrial accident, leaving her able to produce only whispers and harmonics. In her home society, she'd been considered disabled. Here, her unique voice had become the cornerstone of interspecies communication through musical language. "Thank you for listening," Echo whispered, her damaged voice somehow carrying perfectly through the space. "It has been long since we performed for new ears." Commander Vex remained silent for several seconds, then turned to Marcus. "This was not what we expected to find." "What did you expect? Weapons? Conspiracies? Threats to galactic stability?" She gestured around the cultural center. "Not this," Marcus nodded. "That's what most people expect when they hear about a station full of defects and outcasts. But defective often just means different, and different perspectives can create things that conventional thinking never could." The inspection team departed 3 hours later with a report that Marcus suspected would be very different from what the Council had anticipated. Commander Vex's final words lingered in his mind. Perhaps the Council's definition of defective needs examination. As the ships disappeared into hyperspace, Marcus found himself back in the observation deck with Kaida and several other residents. The station hummed around them with activity, with life, with purpose. Think they'll leave us alone now? Kaida asked. Marcus looked out at the stars, thinking about the FTL communicator hidden in Nina's aquatic lab, about Dr. Okafor's medical breakthroughs, about all the innovations that were quietly revolutionizing how people thought about difference and ability. I think, he said slowly, we're about to become very busy. Word is going to spread, not just among the outcasts, but among the people who make decisions. He was right. Within days, Haven Station began receiving inquiries from research institutions, colony administrators, and even government agencies. The beings they'd all dismissed as worthless were creating solutions to problems that had stumped the galaxy's best minds for centuries. The age of celebrating difference rather than fearing it had begun, and Haven Station stood at its center, proof that what others called broken could actually be extraordinary. 2 years after the Galactic Council inspection, Marcus found himself standing before the largest gathering of species representatives in galactic history. The Grand Assembly Hall on Nexus Prime could hold 50,000 beings, and every seat was filled. The air hummed with translation matrices working overtime to handle the babble of languages, while the atmosphere processors struggled to maintain an environment suitable for the diverse physiologies present. In the VIP section, Haven Station's residents sat together, their unique features no longer hidden or ashamed. Kaida wore a formal vest that complemented her fur, while Ember had polished his scales until they gleamed like jewels. Dr. Okafor sat with the human delegation, but her attention was focused on her friends and colleagues from the station. The reason for this unprecedented gathering was simple. The galaxy had changed, and Haven Station had been the catalyst. The moderator, an ancient Vorthak with ceremonial implants, called for attention. We are gathered to address the paradigm shift that has occurred in our understanding of biological and cognitive diversity. The so-called Haven effect has fundamentally altered our approach to what we previously termed genetic and developmental failures. Marcus remembered the beginning of the change. It had started small, with colonies quietly implementing Chorus's agricultural techniques. Food security had improved dramatically on worlds that had struggled with harsh conditions. When asked about the source of the innovations, colonial administrators had been forced to acknowledge that the breakthrough had come from a defective, hive-born Thessian. The revelation had sparked controversy in the Thessian Empire. How could an exile, cut off from the collective consciousness that defined their species, develop superior methods? The initial response had been denial, then accusations of data theft. But as more colonies adopted the techniques and reported similar results, the Empire had been forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. The collective consciousness might actually limit individual innovation. The ripple effects had spread rapidly. Dr. Okafor's adaptive medicine protocols were now standard practice in frontier hospitals throughout human space and beyond. Her work with cross-species treatments had saved thousands of lives and opened new possibilities for integrated colonies where multiple species could coexist safely. The FTL communication breakthrough had perhaps caused the most dramatic changes. Independent colonies no longer relied on the major powers' communication networks. Trade routes shifted as previously isolated worlds could coordinate directly with each other. The old system of information control that had maintained the balance of power for centuries was crumbling. The first presenter, announced the moderator, will address agricultural innovations developed through alternative cognitive approaches. Chorus stood and moved to the presentation platform with the precise, measured steps that characterized their species. Without the constant mental noise of the collective, they had developed an individual personality that was both familiar and entirely unique among Thessians. Honored delegates, Chorus began, their voice carrying clearly through the translation matrix. I wish to discuss the advantages of isolated cognitive development in agricultural innovation. The Thessian delegation shifted uncomfortably as Chorus laid out the principles behind their breakthrough techniques. The fundamental insight was simple. The collective consciousness, while providing shared knowledge and coordination, also enforced conformity of thought that prevented radical innovation. Only by being cut off from the hive mind could Chorus think in ways that challenged established agricultural doctrine. The implications extend beyond agriculture, Chorus continued. Any field requiring breakthrough thinking may benefit from cognitive diversity, including perspectives that diverge from species norms. The presentation lasted 30 minutes, but its impact would resonate for decades. By the time Chorus finished, several other Thessian colonies had quietly contacted Haven Station about establishing their own research facilities for cognitive deviance. Dr. Okafor spoke next, presenting her medical research to a rapt audience. Her work demonstrated that genetic differences often provided unique advantages when approached as variations rather than defects. The mollusk engineer's corrosive secretions had become the basis for new surgical techniques. The ethereal's phase-shifting instability had led to breakthroughs in quantum medicine. We have learned, she concluded, that what we call disability or defect is often simply difference that we lack the imagination to utilize properly. The audience erupted in discussion as species representatives realized the implications for their own societies. How many innovations had been lost because their creators were deemed unsuitable for mainstream society? Ember took the platform next, his small form dwarfed by the massive hall. When he spoke, his voice carried the cadence of poetry, turning his technical presentation into something approaching art. The intersection of artistic expression and scientific innovation has proven more valuable than either discipline alone, he began. Poetry provides pattern recognition that pure logic cannot achieve. Art reveals connections that escape analytical thinking. He demonstrated this by showing the development of their FTL communication system. The breakthrough had come not from advanced physics or engineering, but from artistic interpretation of quantum states as poetic metaphors. The seemingly random light patterns of the defective crystalloids followed rhythms similar to verse, creating coherent meaning from apparent chaos. In our previous societies, Ember continued, artists and scientists were separate castes with little interaction. This artificial division limited both fields. When we integrated artistic and analytical thinking, solutions emerged that neither approach could achieve independently. The demonstration that followed left the audience speechless. Using their quantum communication system, Ember contacted research stations across the galaxy in real time, sharing poetry that conveyed complex scientific data through metaphorical language. It was simultaneously communication, art, and technology, functioning at a level that transcended any single discipline. As the presentations continued, Marcus found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. What had started as a moral impulse to rescue the unwanted had become a revolution in how galactic society understood ability and difference. The economic impact alone had been staggering. Haven Station's innovations were now worth trillions of credits in galactic markets. But more importantly, they had proven that diversity of thought and ability was not just ethically valuable but practically essential for advancement. The final presentation came from Marcus himself. He had not planned to speak, but the assembly moderator had requested his perspective as the human who had initiated the changes. Standing before 50,000 beings, Marcus felt the weight of what they had accomplished together. He began by telling the story of the auction, of beings sold as defective merchandise, of the terror and despair he had witnessed in those cages. I made that purchase for simple moral reasons, he said. It seemed wrong to treat sentient beings as disposable. I had no grand plan, no vision of what they might accomplish. He paused, looking at his friends and colleagues in the audience. What I discovered was that every being we rescued brought unique perspectives shaped by their differences. Their struggles had given them insights that those who fit standard molds could never develop. They didn't need to be fixed or cured. They needed to be valued for what they already were. Marcus went on to describe how Haven Station had become a model for inclusive development. Rather than trying to normalize differences, they had built systems that accommodated and celebrated them. The results spoke for themselves in improved innovation rates, enhanced problem-solving capabilities, and advances that had benefited the entire galaxy. The lesson is not that difference is good or bad, he concluded. The lesson is that difference is valuable. A galaxy that only accepts one way of being, thinking, or creating is a galaxy that limits its own potential. The applause that followed was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. It wasn't polite diplomatic acknowledgement, but genuine appreciation from beings who had seen their fundamental assumptions about society challenged and transformed. In the days that followed the assembly, delegations from across the galaxy visited Haven Station. What had once been an isolated outpost had become a pilgrimage destination for researchers, policymakers, and individuals seeking alternatives to their society's rigid definitions of normal. The Thessian Empire established the first official Cognitive Diversity Research Institute, staffed by volunteers willing to be temporarily severed from the collective consciousness. The Crystalloid Consortium began celebrating unusual light patterns as artistic achievements rather than manufacturing defects. Even the rigidly hierarchical Krellian Republic created programs to identify and support individuals who didn't fit standard social roles. But perhaps the most significant change was in how the galaxy approached the auction houses. The trade in defective beings had always existed on the margins of legality. After Haven Station's success, public opinion shifted dramatically. What had once been seen as disposal of waste products was now recognized as the trafficking of potentially valuable individuals. Marcus stood in his office aboard Haven Station, reading reports from across the galaxy. Auction houses were closing as buyers disappeared. Rescue organizations were forming to intercept beings before they could be sold. Most importantly, species after species was beginning to question their own criteria for what constituted normal or valuable members of society. Kaida entered with the day's communication logs. Her role had evolved from cultural liaison to coordinator of interspecies exchange programs. Dozens of worlds now sent their problematic individuals to Haven for education and training, with the understanding that they would return home as recognized experts in their fields. The mollusk homeworld wants to establish a sister station, she reported. They're offering to fund construction in exchange for technical support from Engineer Flux. Marcus nodded, unsurprised. The pattern had repeated across dozens of species as they realized that their outcasts might be their greatest innovators. Any word from the human colonies? Kaida's tail wagged, a sign she had good news. The Mars settlement wants to establish a formal partnership. They're offering funding for our next expansion in exchange for consultation on their atmospheric processing problems. Through his office viewport, Marcus could see construction beginning on Haven Station's third expansion ring. What had started as emergency housing for auction rescues had grown into the galaxy's premier research and development facility. They now had waiting lists of beings wanting to join their community, not as refugees but as valued contributors. The transformation went beyond policy and economics. Throughout the galaxy, beings who had hidden their differences were beginning to speak openly about their unique perspectives and abilities. Support groups formed for individuals whose traits didn't match their species' standards. Educational systems began incorporating multiple learning styles instead of forcing conformity to single approaches. Dr. Okafor had established medical exchange programs that brought healers from different species together to share techniques. Her most recent breakthrough combined crystalloid light therapy with Thessian collective healing rituals and human psychological counseling, creating treatment protocols that addressed both physical and mental health simultaneously. Echo's work in musical communication had evolved into a new diplomatic tool. Species that had struggled to understand each other for millennia were finding common ground through artistic expression that transcended the limitations of purely linguistic translation. As the months passed, Marcus began to understand that what they had created was larger than Haven Station. Larger than any single innovation, they had sparked a fundamental shift in how galactic civilization understood the relationship between difference and value. The old model had been based on efficiency and conformity. Beings that fit standard templates were valuable. Those that deviated were problems to be solved or discarded. The new model recognized that innovation came from the margins, from perspectives that challenged assumptions and saw possibilities that mainstream thinking missed. Standing in his office as another transport arrived with new residents and researchers, Marcus thought about his sister back on Earth. Her artistic work with natural fibers had led to breakthroughs in sustainable manufacturing that were now being implemented across human space. She had never been defective, just different in ways that took time for others to appreciate. That was the real lesson of Haven Station. The galaxy was full of beings whose value wasn't immediately apparent to conventional thinking. By creating spaces where difference was celebrated rather than corrected, they had unlocked potential that had always existed but had never been properly recognized. The transformation was far from complete. Centuries of prejudice and rigid thinking couldn't be overturned overnight. But for the first time in galactic history, being different wasn't automatically seen as being defective. The outcasts and misfits had proven that their perspectives were not just valid but essential for continued progress. As Marcus watched another group of new arrivals disembark from their transport, each carrying their own unique combination of abilities and challenges, he smiled. The auction had sold them as flawed aliens, broken goods fit only for research or disposal. Instead, they had become the architects of a new understanding of what it meant to be valuable in a diverse galaxy. They had transformed from specimens to be studied into teachers, showing everyone else what was possible when difference was embraced rather than feared. The revolution had begun with a simple human decision to value beings that no one else wanted. It would continue, as long as there were differences to be celebrated and potential to be unlocked in the margins of galactic society.